Good evening, everyone. I'm Deborah Winter. We're going to start tonight's program with our first song, Our Country by John Mellencamp. If you'd like to follow along with the lyrics, you can find them in just a moment in the chat. Well, I can stand beside ideas I think are right, and I can stand beside the idea to stand and fight. I do believe there's a dream for everyone. This is our country. From the East Coast to the West Coast, down the Dixie Highway back home. This is our country. There's room enough here for science to live, and there's room enough here for religion to forgive and try to understand other people of this land. This is our country. And poverty could be just another ugly thing, and bigotry would be seen only as obscene, and the ones that run this land help the poor and common man. This is our country. From the East Coast to the West Coast, down the Dixie Highway back home. This is our country. The dream is still alive, someday it will come true, and this country, it belongs to folks like me and you. So let the voice of freedom sing out through this land. This is our country. From the East Coast to the West Coast, down the Dixie Highway back home. This is our country. This is our country.
Good evening. Can y'all hear me okay? Good evening, everybody. I am Vernetta Perkins Walker from Selma, Alabama, and I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's Civic Convention, the need for a new civic path. Over the last few months, we have watched as the presidential race has fundamentally changed. Yet, the underlying conditions of this country and our communities remain the same. They have pervasive mistrust, growing inequities, and a lack of hope. This is certainly true in Selma, Alabama. And as the Dallas County District Judge serving in an elected position, I know how important elections are for our local communities and for the country. This election is no exception. Voting is critical. But believe me, November's outcome alone cannot solve the issues facing Selma or our country. Moving our country forward requires something much deeper. If we really want to move the country forward, we need to get on a new civic path that starts in our local communities. When Rich visited Selma last month to deliver the keynote address at the annual NAACP banquet, his message got me fired up. It is exactly what Selma needs. I kind of stay fired up, as you can probably imagine, but it is exactly what Selma needs. And it's what our country needs, y'all. And that's why I'm here tonight. It's also why our speakers are here tonight. They've seen how a civic path, a new civic path, can transform our communities. Tonight, we're going to hear from catalytic leaders from Reading, PA, once a white working class community that today is more than 70% Hispanic. Let me make sure I'm saying this right. Alamance. Y'all know I'm a little country, work with me. Alamance County, North Carolina, one of the most divided places in the country, and Lexington, Kentucky, a rapidly growing community where many feel in danger of being left out or left behind. Following a conversation with the speakers, Rich will lay out his argument for why now, more than ever, y'all, we need a new civic path. Throughout the evening, we will be treated with musical performances from Deborah Winter. This evening is intended to be both a respite, a safe haven, but it's also a moment to propel you forward. So please sit back, take in the evening, let the music inspire you, let the special guests motivate you to help move our communities and the nation forward. We'd love to hear from you throughout the evening, so we'll be answering a few questions for you as you engage in the chat. So the first question that we want you all to answer in the chat, are y'all ready? You got to engage. This is a participation night. All right. The first question is, why is it so important for you to be here tonight? If y'all had a day like mine, it's been long. And so why are you pushing through to come and do something like this in the midst of everything else you have going on in your life? Why are you here? Place your answers in the chat. We can't wait to chat back with you. All right. So now we're going to welcome our first speaker, Miss Tracy Grazer, president of Impact. Tracy, you're going to have to get me.
It's Alamance, Bernetta. You got it. Thank you.
President of Impact Alamance, the Institute's partner for community initiative in Alamance County, North Carolina. Listen, county to my head, not my heart. All right. I'm sorry about that, but I promise you it won't happen twice. I'm a quick learner. Thank you.
All right. I know you are. Thanks, Bernetta.
Take it away.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be here tonight. I think each of us is here because we care about our community and we care about our country. So my community is one of the most divided places in America. I have lived in Alamance County for almost 25 years now. We're a growing county. We're right in the center of North Carolina, and we have a rich history that predates the Revolution. And many of the divides that existed then are still very present now. We have fault lines, as we call them, across many different areas. Those who have been born and raised here versus all of the new folks who are moving in. Where you live in the county, whether that is the east versus the west or the urban versus the semi-urban or more rural areas. We have divides across race and ethnicity, across socioeconomic status, and of course, we have political divides. I say that we are a very red county in a somewhat purple state. So politics are important. And I still intend to vote in the upcoming election. I certainly hope each person on the call does tonight as well. But we're learning in Alamance County that these divides across all of these different areas don't have to define who we are as a community. I personally have always believed that people in community hold the answers and the solutions to their challenges. We just have to hear them, and we have to empower them to take action. And that's what we're doing through this work. It's helping people to step forward and to learn that despite our many differences and the fact that we may have very differing views on things, that we can find common aspirations and we can find new ways of working together that will create positive change. Civic engagement and creating a civic path forward is a form of caring for our communities. There's a lot of research that shows that communities with high rates of civic engagement have better educational, health, and economic outcomes. We have talked to hundreds of people through this work, and now we're working with dozens of folks who have stepped forward from our agricultural community to our marginalized youth, and they are coming together to take action. Our faith team has held numerous Love for Alamance days, where different faith congregations throughout the county have come together, and they are holding volunteer service projects at our schools and our nonprofit organizations. We have a dedicated group of volunteers who's working on really identifying the common aspirations that we have across Alamance County and figuring out how we can create new norms of working together and how we can bridge some of our divides. And our local university is leading a narrative team to try to shift how we talk about our community and to lift positive stories that are happening each and every day. Each of these wins is an example of how we're strengthening civic culture and creating a more hopeful future. We all have a role in this work. It takes all of us. And quite honestly, each and every one of us is needed now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Our next speaker is Mike Toledo, President and CEO of Centro Hispano. one of the Institute's partners for the Community Initiative in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Good evening, everyone. Bienvenido. It's an honor to be here with you tonight from my hometown of Reading, Pennsylvania. So for the baby boomers and Gen Xers out there, you know, home of the Reading Railroad that you remember from your Monopoly board, right? And, you know, for the millennials and Gen Zers out there, the original home of Taylor Swift, right? So again, my story, like many of you, is one of family and legacy. You know, my grandparents immigrated to Reading during World War II. And at that time, Reading was predominantly Caucasian. Today, however, our city is a very diverse community with over 70% of the population identifying as Latino. You know, my family faced many challenges here, but despite the struggles, you know, they shared a common aspiration that we all have, you know, to provide hope and opportunity for the future generations to come. As a community leader here in Reading, I'm blessed to lead the Hispanic Center, and I am in constant conversation with the Latino community about the importance of voting. At the Hispanic Center, we're deeply committed to ensuring that all in our community are engaged and educated around the importance of voting. I mean, we're working with partners like the Greater Reading Unity Coalition, and together we're promoting the importance of voting across social media platforms, in our neighborhoods, knocking on doors, on the airwaves, again, encouraging voters to make sure that they understand that their voices are important and that their voices need to be heard this November. But again, let's be clear, you know, voting alone won't solve all of our challenges. It's just one piece of the puzzle. And that's why I'm equally committed to fostering this new civic path that we're talking about tonight, where all voices are valued, all voices are lifted up together. I've seen firsthand how this approach is transforming Reading. Through our work with Rich and the Harwood team, we heard from city residents. They shared with us about the lack of safe spaces and safe places for their youth after school. So we initiated an effort where our youth could congregate, eat, and share their aspirations for their community at the Hispanic Center. We fed them, and after dinner, we hosted a movie at the theater that was right across the street. Before long, this youth initiative, we started receiving parents, and grandparents started joining their children. What originally started as a teen initiative became an intergenerational program that for the last 5 months, we have had over 200 members of our community coming together, eating together, talking to each other, and be associating with one another. We're witnessing families coming out of their homes, out of the shadows, and into the town square, taking their rightful place in our community. This is our way that we're creating the systemic change that we want to see in Reading. Small efforts that lead to bigger positive change. This is how we've worked together in new ways, focusing on what truly matters to people. It's led to real progress and a strengthening civic culture in Reading. Again, we all have a role to play. It's up to you to decide what role you will play in your communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Our final speaker is Penny Christian, Chair of the National PTA Family Engagement Committee and member of the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence in Lexington, Kentucky.
Thank you, Tristan. Good evening, everyone. I've lived in Kentucky since 1991, but full disclosure, I was born and raised in NOLA, and that's where my heart is. So if I got any Louisiana folk on here, who dat, and I'm thankful that you're here. I do apologize on the front end. I'm just getting over COVID, and my voice will crack, but the words will be sound. So first of all, I'm a mother of 4 Black young women living in America. From the time they were in elementary school, I made them aware of the significance of that. excuse me, it is actually why my relationship with this country is, complicated. What exactly is the American dream? It is a myth. I told my girls very early on that they would have to work twice as hard to get half as far. They were smart. I knew that they were smart, creative, honest, and capable. But was that going to be enough for them to succeed? Engaging the climate in America right now, I would venture to say no. So, where does this leave me, right? Regardless of my anger and frustration, I understand and acknowledge that voting can impact the exact concerns I have, especially at the local level, right? Local elections matter. I'm not sure if my anger stems from the state of our country or the response to it. What I do know is that we must vote. At the end of the day, my hope comes not from the actual vote, from the act of voting itself. On the contrary, the last few election cycles have felt fruitless and wasteful. No, my renewed hope comes from civic faith. In Lexington, we have a history of people getting together, but not working together, or lip service being given to hearing all voices. This started to shift with the work we did with Harwood. We identified that if we wanted to get at the fundamental challenges facing our community, we needed to change the way we were working together. We needed to get on a new civic path. The Harwood approach made me feel empowered and obligated to step forward in ways I hadn't before. I never thought that running for office would be part of my path, but to make a difference for the kids in my community, I have stepped forward to run for school board. I view it as a direct expression of civic faith. During my campaign for school board, Harwood Civic Campaign has been a consistent source of energy for me. The civic rallies have become a safe space where people are free to just breathe, where I know I can share my opinion without being attacked, vilified, or judged. Excuse me. Where I can find rejuvenation and inspiration to continue to forge a new civic path in Lexington. This work is not easy. At times, what we are up against feels like it's too much. But that's when I remind myself we all sometimes need to take a step back in order to just keep stepping forward. Harwood helps me do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny, and thank you to each of our speakers for bringing those incredible words of wisdom. I'm Michael with the Harwood Institute. Just want to take a moment to lift up a couple things that we've been hearing in the chat so far this evening. Thanks to all who responded so far. A couple things that I'm seeing in the commonalities in our responses is, first, there's a number of us who are saying that we're here this evening because we're, for one reason or another, worried about the future of our communities and at large, the future of our country. Another thing that I'm seeing from many of us tonight is that, we're here because we're looking for hope. We yearn to be inspired, and there's not much in the state of our country right now that is giving us hope. And so spaces like this can provide that for us. There's also a number of us who are saying that we have a real desire to see our communities grow in new ways and in more positive ways than what is currently happening. And this final one that is very much embedded in what each of our speakers just shared with us is this recognition and this belief that we need each other if we're going to move forward today.
Great, thanks, Michael. Hey, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rich Harwood from the Harwood Institute. Really glad that you're all with us tonight. Thank you to Tracy, Mike, and Penny for your inspiring words. And Michael, I think many of us are really worried about the country. I was with folks yesterday and I asked the question, how are you feeling today? And one person said, I'm scared. Another person said, I'm worried. Another person said, I would like to be hopeful. I would like to be hopeful. I think we'd all like to be hopeful. And I think our three speakers tonight offer us a sense of hope, each in their own way. So let's have a conversation for a few minutes. And Tracy, I'll start with you, if it's okay. As you know, I've spent a lot of time now in Alamance County with you. And if you weren't on this new civic path now that you're courageously helping to lead in Alamance County, what do you think might happen in the county if you weren't on this path?
I think the divides would continue to grow. We've talked about this, Rich, and especially when it comes to the hope, and that's something when you were saying trying to create a more hopeful future. I feel like a lot of people in this community had really lost hope, and it wasn't because there are a lot of big bad things happening here, but there are a lot of good things happening here too. People don't know about them, and it have become so disconnected and disengaged from civic life that they had no voice in what was happening here. So I think that the divides would, it would continue to get deeper and deeper, and folks would stay in their own silos, and the things that we want to happen to create a stronger community just would, there's no way that they would. You cannot move things forward or have change when folks can't even talk to each other.
Mhm. And do people just start in mass start talking to each other? Is it sort of
No.
like everyone at once?
No, I think that that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned on this journey. It is hard work. It is hard work. And you have to be willing to step forward and step outside of your comfort zone and engage with people that you might not normally be willing to talk to, people that have different views than you, that you may not agree with at all. And I also believe that if you talk to someone long enough, you're going to find something that you have in common, and you're going to find some common aspiration. So I will say that our work has started very small, and it's very intentional. I think that a word that you use quite often is ruthless. We're ruthlessly strategic and relentless in continuing to try to tap people and bring them into the conversation. So things do start small. I would say we probably have 50 to 75 folks who are really actively engaged in the work right now. And so, no, it's not everybody in Alamance County is ready to step forward, but as we start to see wins, then it spreads and more people are hearing about it and want to know what's going on. And then they become curious and we invite them in. So it is something that happens in a chain reaction over time. Start small to go big. So we're still in the small space, but even the small trajectory creates hope.
Mm, mm. Mike, you mentioned folks coming out of the shadows, and there are so many folks in our country, as I travel across the country, who talk in really palpable ways about how they feel left out and left behind, about how they don't feel seen and heard, about how they don't feel valued. What was it in Reading that enabled folks to come out from in the shadows back into community life to be with others? And what do you think we can learn from that?
I think, Rich, what it was allowing them, providing them a safe space, demonstrating and showing to them that they matter. Taking decisions that we were making in the boardroom and having those conversations in the communities where the families were, where they had a place at the table and they had an opportunity to lift up their voice and share what was important to them. I think that's the change that, again, slowly we were taking those steps in Reading. And in doing so, more and more folks started to step up and step out and say, okay, this is a safe space for me. It's no longer the loudest voices that were, that dominated the town square. And because of that, we've been very deliberate in making sure that members of the community, again, are welcomed, have a place, and we value their thoughts, their opinions. We want to give them hope. And that's how we've been able to do it, to reach families that for so long have been unattainable.
You talked about the loudest voices. When the work in Reading began, we were at the height of a culture war around education. Books were being banned. There were debates over critical race theory and DEI. School board officials were being recalled. School superintendents were being summarily fired overnight. I remember giving a speech in Sarasota County when I walked in that morning for the speech, and they said the school board, the superintendent had been fired the night before without much notice. And yet, amid those loudest voices and amid those culture wars, at the height of them, Reading was actually able to come together and create a community-led, community-driven educational equity agenda that had 9 points that, as you began to talk about earlier, you're working on and have made phenomenal progress, remarkable progress. What do you think that says, that this community was able to create this agenda at the very height of these culture wars when people told us, don't even undertake this initiative? It's a waste of time.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, is to not underestimate, the community. Their voice, they want to be heard. It's a matter of giving them that venue to be able to have their voice be lifted up. Again, they care about education, they care about their community. And it was just taking that chance, to give them that opportunity, and they've run with it. And they continue to run with it. I mean, we continue to see other partners and other communities coming together, wanting to engage in terms of the work that we're trying to do. And again, we're always extending with open arms. All are welcomed. All are welcomed. And let's hear what your aspirations are. Let's hear about your concerns, and give credence to what's important to them. And we'll continue to do that, to break down those barriers that they felt that they've had for years, those barriers of access that we're breaking down.
Penny, you began by saying your relationship with the nation's history is complicated. And you have 4 daughters who you're helping to navigate this complicated relationship. It would have been easy for you, or easier at the very least, to step back, to not step forward, to not do the work that you do at the National PTA, to not do the work that you do at the Pritchard Committee in Kentucky, and importantly, to not make yourself so vulnerable and run for school board at this moment. And I'm curious, what enabled you to do all that?
That's a great question. And, the elections are in November. And so now this is the time where we have a lot of endorsement interviews.
Mm.
And every time, every single one, the first question is, why? How did you get on this path? I said, don't ask me why, because you might hear something you don't want to hear, because I don't really have a good answer. My youngest just graduated in 23 from high school. And years and years ago, when I really started on my PTA path, people were saying, why haven't you run for school board? And I said, that's not my wheelhouse. And I said it wasn't my wheelhouse because, one, I felt like I would be locked in and pigeonholed, if you will. I would be limited in what I could do and how I could advocate, because I'm that voice in the room, right? I'm that person who pushes back. And as I got to the national level, and as I started doing more stuff with Frankfurt and the Kentucky Department of Education, I said, I can push back with that title, right? You may not like it, don't care. And Rich knows this, I never care. But when you talk about vulnerability, my girls, for the most part, I mean, they're all out now, but there were times where their parents had to come in and fight for them. But every time I had to, it reminded me that I guarantee you that there's a baby out there who doesn't have a family that can fight for them. Or worse yet, they have a family that wants to, but has no idea how. I cannot sit back and do for mine when I know I got 44,000 babies in this district who may very well need that same help or some sort of help, because everybody needs something. So that's what finally made me jump off the cliff.
Well, actually, you do care because that's why you jumped.
Yes.
But to be clear, so what enables you to, on this civic path, what enables you to keep fighting to create a stronger community and a stronger country, for us to make some modicum of progress?
It's really hard in Lexington. This is siloed work, and you know that firsthand. I've been in rooms where people have made it very clear what the needs and desires are. And the usual suspects, those louder voices, will shout them down. Or what's worse, they would just ignore them, right? When I started being invited to rooms where people legitimately said they wanted to hear what I had to say, I said, okay, let's see what that looks like. So then I started training other people. And then I said, you've got to have a sense, yes, of vulnerability, but more so, you've got to have that sense of empathy. If I don't have to walk in your shoes to understand that something's missing.
Mm.
And in this city, when I talk about empathy, my issue is now, understand, Kentucky is a super red majority state. Lexington, Fayette County is blue. However, there's this notion that if I help someone else, I'm going to lose what I have. That's the door that I'm bashing in right now, because just because you're helping someone else, it doesn't mean that you're going to have to give up something.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to lose it. So that's where I am now. But it's about vulnerability and empathy. You've got to put yourself out there, and you're going to bleed a bit, but that's okay.
Yeah, this is a question for all of you. One of the things that strikes me about this civic path, Penny, you said that running for school board wasn't originally in your wheelhouse. And, what's interesting about this civic path is that people discover that they have innate capabilities and talents and resources that they never dreamed were in their wheelhouse. And that when that occurs, our ability to take action together, in a sense, exponentially grows. Our sense of faith in ourselves and one another exponentially grows. The possibilities for the future exponentially grow. So I'm just curious if something, as I talk about this wheelhouse, if there's something that comes to mind where you've seen people step forward and take action that wasn't necessarily in their line of sight in terms of their wheelhouse, or maybe that other people never thought was in their wheelhouse.
When I started, of course, I started a PTA. I was a elementary school mom. By the time I became a district president, one of my charges was identifying and growing leaders. And I have to say, PTA started me on that whole, first of all, well, Harwood actually taught me this whole critique versus criticism, right? Because I would criticize a lot. And I know I did that because this is the way that it should be done, which is interesting because I'm not a control freak by nature. But when it came to the work and advocacy work, I needed to make sure it was done right. That said, when I identified and grew leaders, the growing was the part, right? Because I need you to follow through. I can identify you. If I don't give you the tools, if I don't empower you to come through and do this work, then the identification was for naught. And so many times I had people who say, I never thought. I'm a PTA president now. I'm going to run for state board. And someone took a chance. You got to be able to identify. And that means that you have to see some talents that you may not have in yourself, that they may have. And you see a lot of times you have that, you see your shortcomings in someone else and say, God, that's good.
Yeah.
And then you bring them in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always thought of that. If you're on the civic path, it requires courage, but it equally requires humility. It equally requires humility. Tracy or Mike, any thoughts on this? And then we'll close. We'll hear another tune from Deborah.
Yeah, we're still working on it. But one example comes to mind. So we had a lot of difficulty engaging rural parts of our community. So we've had much better success in what we would consider the more urban or semi-urban parts of Alamance County. And we had a conversation with our agricultural community probably about a month or so ago. And it was an incredible conversation. They had a lot of great things to say. And there was one gentleman in the room who is a sheep farmer and a blacksmith. And after the conversation, he said, I'm just a lowly farmer. I'm not a leader. I can't do anything about this. And we had a conversation after that. And I said, you absolutely are. Everyone's a leader. We all lead from our seat. You know, we lead in what we can do in our communities, the action that we can take, how we listen to other people. Leadership's not a title or a position. It's, you know, how we show up. So, you know, we've been talking and he's trying to figure out what this means, but I'm hoping that he will be able to step forward and take the charge of leading the group of other folks in the agricultural community to try to figure out how they can be engaged in this work. So I think there are a lot of people that don't think they have the capacity to do this work, but once they have the tools and they have the support, that they do find things in themselves that they might not have seen otherwise.
Mike, you got a quick story?
Yeah, for me, it's again the parents. We focused on the youth, but the parents came out and wanted to be involved and engaged. So we had them participate in our Opening Doors initiative to help parents to understand their roles as their child's most important teacher and advocate in the schools and classrooms. So these parents went from not coming out of the house and afraid for their children to go anywhere to now advocating for their children in the classroom, volunteering in the classroom, and being agents of change in the schools that their kids go to. So, I mean, that's again a true testament of providing that opportunity and watch people grow.
Great. I want to thank Tracy, Mike, and Penny for joining us tonight. It's always a blessing to be with you. And here's another question for folks to answer in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. After hearing Tracy, Mike, and Penny, why do you think a civic path is so important today for your community and for the country? Why do you think a civic path is so important today for your community and the country? And while you're thinking about that, here's another lovely tune from Deborah.
Arise, arise, I see the future in your eyes. To a more perfect union we aspire and lift our voices from the fire. Atlantic and Pacific flow, the Great Lakes and the Gulf of Mexico. The land between sustains us all, to cherish it our tireless call. Arise, arise, I see the future in your eyes. To a more perfect union we aspire and lift our voices from the fire. We reached these shores from many lands. We came with hungry hearts and hands. Some came by force and some by will, at the auction block or the darkened mill. Arise, arise, I see the future in your eyes. To a more perfect union we aspire and lift our voices from the fire. My sisters, brothers, neighbors, friends, we've work to do and ties to mend. Though discord may be all around, our goals lives are shared, our fates are bound. Arise, arise, I see the future in your eyes. To a more perfect union we aspire, and lift our voices from the fire.
Thanks, Deborah. That was wonderful. As we come to the close, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about why this civic path is so important and why we think it's so important today, right now. You know, wherever I go across the country, I hear the same thing from folks, that we can do better, that we can be better as individuals, in our communities, and in our country as a nation. And I hear over and over again people saying they've had enough, that there's too much division in our country, that there's too much hatred and bigotry, that there's too much despair, that there's too much acrimony, that there's too much finger pointing, that too many people have lost hope. They've had enough and they want to move forward. Now, I know that this campaign in the last few weeks has fundamentally changed. The dynamics have changed. I know no matter which side you're for, there is a new excitement in the country. Volunteers are pouring out, contributions are pouring in. But let's be clear, no matter who is elected in November and who becomes the next president of the United States, or which party governs Congress, the underlying conditions of our country will remain. The lack of hope among so many people, the deep mistrust that exists in our communities, the growing inequities and disparities. Look, inequities and disparities aren't diminishing, they're growing in our country at this very moment. The sense of loneliness, the epidemic of loneliness that we are facing, the despair that so many people face, what I talked about earlier about so many folks feeling left out and left behind and unseen and unheard. These underlying conditions will remain, and it seems to me that they are a human challenge. They are fundamentally a human challenge that require a human response, a much deeper response than simply what can come from the White House, as important as that might be to our future. We need a human response to a set of human challenges that are plaguing our country today. Now, more divisive politics won't get us there. We know that. And so we've come to believe that we need a new civic path that begins in our local communities with us, where we can turn outward toward one another and see and hear one another and lift up each other's dignity, where we can figure out what we can agree on amid our real differences, and there are real differences, figure out what we can agree on and get moving on it and begin to take action together. And in doing so, grow our civic confidence and grow our sense of belief in ourselves and in one another, that we can actually come together and get things done. You know, I was sitting next to someone at dinner the other night in Alabama, in Selma, and they kept bemoaning the Republicans or Democrats in our country. And I said, you know, we're working in some of the most conservative areas in the country. We're working in some of the most liberal areas in the country right now. And I got to tell you that when we're working with folks and they're doing the work, I can't tell who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. No one's walking around with a big R on their chest or a big D on their chest. What they are walking around with are concerns about what matters to them in their daily lives, about how we can ensure that every youth has a real opportunity in our communities and in the society, about how every child can go to a good public school and has the ability to do so, about how seniors are cared for, about how healthcare is accessible to everyone and affordable to everyone, about housing is affordable and we take care of the homeless and figure out how to really address the underlying causes of those challenges. We don't need R's and D's for this. We need Americans. We need Americans. And we need a greater sense of shared responsibility. Each speaker tonight talked about the hope the hope that we can find in their work, the hope that's emerging out of Alamance County, which is, as Tracy said, one of the most divided communities in the country, but is finding ways to come together, and not just come together, but to take action that matters to people to improve their lives. Reading, Pennsylvania, which 10 years ago was declared the poorest community in all of America, where people said they are going to be left out and left behind, where they're called the donut hole in Berks County in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And yet we're about to release a new report about Reading, Pennsylvania, and the transformational systemic work that they have created around education issues and fundamentally change the civic culture of their town. They're not being left out and left behind. They're leading the way for the rest of America. And in Lexington, Kentucky, Penny talked about the silos and people getting together but not working together, about the need to break down doors, about the need to ensure that each of her daughters has a full opportunity in America. And she inspired each of us, amid the challenges that we see, the complicated histories we have with this country, the ambivalence we may feel about things, the anger we may feel, and even the rage we may experience. Penny inspires each of us to step forward and not to let others take over, but for us to come back into the public square and work together. You know, I have great hope in this future, in our future. And I happen to love this country. And I know that there are some people who cringe when they hear me say that. And I said, I love the country so deeply, and I'm not afraid to say that we were founded on original sins in terms of how we treated indigenous populations, how we enslaved people, how we made so many wrong turns in our country. And yet we are one of the only countries in the world, I think, that is always seeking to do better and to be better. That we won't settle for what is, we're always striving for what can be. And sometimes it's a messy forward path, we know that. But we continue to try to create a more perfect union. The significant change, much of the significant change that got created in our country did not start in Washington, D.C., and it did not start in our state capitals. It started in our local communities, starting with the American Revolution, where the 13 colonies agreed on very little other than they wanted to kick King George, the tyrant, the hell out of our land. The abolition movement started in local communities. Women's suffrage movement started in local communities. Child welfare laws started in local communities. Voting rights and civil rights, I was just in Selma, as the judge just said, that started in Selma. It didn't start in Washington, D.C. The march didn't occur in Washington, D.C. It was over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. Gay rights started in our local communities. The change we need in America begins in our local communities. Our task today, as many of you said in the chat, is to find a way to move forward together. We as human beings are meant to go together. We are meant to be together. We're not meant to go it alone, to be alone. We need each other to go together. So let's go together. Let's do this work together. Let's keep seeking to create a more perfect union, and let's do it by getting on a new civic path. Like much in our history, we can start small and grow our efforts over time, and it can spread across this great nation and help us transform the direction that we're moving in. Now, we believe, in closing, I just want to say quickly, we believe so deeply in this new civic path that, as many of you know, we've been on the road speaking to communities all across the country, that we're doubling down on this strategy between now and Election Day. And so we'll be on the road full time between now and Thanksgiving. We're going to take a swing through Pennsylvania, including Reading. We're going to take a swing across California, and we're going to take a swing through Kentucky. And then we're going to go to Ohio and Florida as well. In addition, early next year, we're going to be releasing a new book that makes the case for a new civic path and lifts up the incredible stories of the work that Americans are doing all across America to demonstrate that this new civic path is not simply a wish, nor is it simply a hope. It's a reality that's happening in our communities all across this nation. And lastly, I just want to say, to help you keep moving forward, we're dropping into the chat right now these mantras that we have that will enable you to be on this civic path with greater strength and greater confidence. The 4 mantras are: turn outward, get in motion, start small to go big, and let's create a new trajectory for hope. So I just want to thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank Judge Renetta Perkins Walker for being here tonight. I want to thank Tracy Grazer from Alamance County, Mike Toledo from Reading, Pennsylvania, and Penny Christian from Lexington. I want to thank my colleague, Michael Prohoda, for being so adept at figuring out what people were saying in the chat so quickly. And I especially want to thank Deborah Winter for inspiring us through her music, and she'll leave us with one last song as we close out the night together. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rich. One last question for all of us from folk singer-songwriter Carrie Newcomer. If not now, tell me when. If not now, tell me when. We may never see this moment or place in time again. If not now, tell me when. I see sorrow and trouble in this land. I see sorrow and trouble in this land. Although there will be struggle, we'll make the change we can. If not now, tell me when. If not now, tell me when. If not now, tell me when. We may never see this moment or place in time again. If not now, tell me when. We may never see the promised land. We may never see the promised land. And yet we'll make the journey. We'll walk it hand in hand. If not now, tell me when. So we'll work until it's done. Every person, everyone, every soul that's ever longed for something better, something brighter. It will take a change of heart for this to mend. It will take a change of heart for this to mend. But miracles do happen every shining now and then. If not now, tell me when. If not now, tell me when. If not now, tell me when. We may never see this moment or place in time again. If not now, tell me